I never planned for this to happen. I wasn't the kind of woman who sought danger, who craved something forbidden. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. But the moment I noticed him, something shifted inside me. He wasn't like the men my age. There was no arrogance, no need to prove himself. Just quiet confidence. A man who had lived, who had seen things. He carried himself differently, with a kind of assurance that drew me in before I even realized it. At first, it was just glances. Moments I told myself were nothing. He'd be out on his porch, sipping coffee, reading a book, the lines around his eyes deepening as he smiled at me. I caught myself watching too long, feeling something I shouldn't. I told myself I was imagining it, that his eyes didn't linger, that the way he spoke to me wasn't different from how he spoke to anyone else. But deep down I knew. I started finding excuses to be outside, when he was watering plants that didn't need watering, taking out the trash at just the right moment. And each time, he'd smile, offer some casual remark. "Early start today?" "Trying to beat the heat?" I'd reply, my pulse quickening. The conversation stayed light, but there was something beneath it. A pull and awareness. One evening, I passed by his house on my way back from a walk. He was leaning against his porch railing, the setting sun casting long shadows over his face. "Join me for a drink?" His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. I hesitated. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I didn't. His house was exactly what I expected. Warm, lived in, filled with history. The kind of place that told stories without needing words. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses, handed me one. Our fingers brushed. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me. We talked about everything and nothing. His past, his travels, the things he had seen. He listened when I spoke in a way most men didn't. Like my words mattered. Like I mattered. I found myself laughing, leaning in, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. And then there was silence. A charged moment where we both knew. I stood up first, placing my glass down carefully, my hands unsteady. "I should go," I said, though every part of me wanted to stay. He didn't stop me, didn't push. He just nodded, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my skin, but I still felt warm. I knew this wasn't the end. I told myself I wouldn't go back. That night had been a mistake, a line I had no business approaching. But the more I tried to resist, the more I found myself craving his presence. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, it was the way he made me feel. Like I wasn't just someone's partner, someone's responsibility. With him, I felt seen. Days passed, then a week. I told myself it was over, but the moment I saw him again, standing by his gate, the pull was undeniable. "You disappeared on me," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I laughed, pretending none of this meant anything. "Been busy." He didn't push, didn't ask for more. Just nodded, that knowing look in his eyes. And that should have been the end of it. But then he said, "Come by later." No expectations. I shouldn't have gone. But I did. This time, there was no hesitation. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I wouldn't be leaving so quickly. There was a quiet intimacy in the air, something unspoken but understood. He poured drinks, we talked, but the words felt secondary to the way his knee brushed mine, the way his fingers lingered a second too long when he handed me my glass. "You're playing a dangerous game," he murmured, watching me. I swallowed hard. "And if I am?" He didn't answer with words, just reached out, his fingers tracing the inside of my wrist, barely touching, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. Every thought of consequences faded. Every reason why this was wrong dissolved. I leaned in first. He let me. His lips barely brushed mine before he pulled back, his breath warm against my skin. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. This kiss wasn't hesitant like I expected. It was deep, consuming, a slow unraveling of everything I thought I knew. His hands weren't rushed or desperate. They were deliberate, certain, making me feel things I hadn't felt in years. I melted into him, lost in something I couldn't name. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to stop. But then reality crept in. The weight of what I was doing pressed against my chest. I pulled away, breathless, my heart hammering. My voice caught, unsure of what I was even trying to say. He searched my face, his expression unreadable. Then he simply nodded, stepping back just enough to give me space. "I won't ask you to stay," he said. "But I won't pretend I don't want you to." The truth settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I left without another word. But even as I walked away, I knew this wasn't the end. It didn't take long before I found myself back at his door. There was no hesitation this time, no excuses. I had already crossed the line. Pretending otherwise was pointless. The moment he saw me, he didn't ask why I was there. He already knew. He stepped aside, letting me in without a word. And the second the door closed, it was different. No small talk. No careful restraint. His hands found my waist, his lips met mine, and I felt like I was unraveling. There was no rush, no frantic desperation, just slow, deliberate touches that made me forget everything else. It wasn't just about desire. It was about something deeper. Something I had been missing for so long. I had never been with someone like him. Someone who understood the weight of every moment, who wasn't just chasing a thrill. He took his time, made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered. And in that moment, I believed it. Days turned into weeks. We fell into a rhythm, stolen hours, whispered words, secrets hidden behind locked doors. Every time I told myself it was the last, I found myself coming back. I learned his habits, the way he smelled, the sound of his voice in the quiet. He learned the way I liked to be touched, the things that made me gasp, the words that made me melt. It wasn't just physical. That was the most dangerous part. He told me about his past, the regrets he carried, the things he wished he had done differently. I listened, soaking in every detail, feeling like I was seeing a part of him no one else had. But the deeper I fell, the more reckless it became. One evening, as I was slipping out of his house, I saw a familiar face across the street. A neighbor watching. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Had they seen me enter? Had they been watching all along? I forced a smile, acting like nothing was wrong, but panic clawed at my chest. I didn't go straight home. I walked around the block, hoping to clear my head, but it didn't help. The guilt was starting to catch up to me, no matter how much I tried to ignore it. And then, the first real crack appeared. A text from my partner. Simple. Direct. "Where are you?" My fingers hovered over the screen, my mind racing. I typed a lie, something about running errands, but for the first time, I hesitated before sending it. This wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a risk. And yet, even as my hands shook, even as my heart pounded, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to stop. The illusion of control didn't last. Affairs never stay contained, no matter how careful you think you are. I should have known that. The first sign was subtle, my partner watching me a little too closely, asking questions that felt harmless on the surface. "You've been out a lot lately," he said one evening, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. I forced a laugh, pretending it was nothing. Just getting some air. "You know how restless I get." But the way he studied me made my stomach twist. He didn't believe me. Then came the second sign. A missed call from an unknown number. I ignored it at first, but then another came. And another. When I finally answered, the voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. I know. 2 words that sent ice through my veins. I didn't recognize the voice, but the message was clear. Someone had seen. Someone knew. I didn't tell him. I went to his house instead, heart pounding, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had someone followed me? Were they going to tell my partner? Was it already too late? He didn't look surprised when I told him. Just sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. It was bound to happen. I hated how calm he was. Hated that he could accept this so easily when my world was crumbling. "We need to stop," I said, the words tasting like betrayal. He nodded, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to. Neither did I. But reality doesn't wait for emotions to catch up. That night, my partner confronted me. I walked into the house, and he was waiting, phone in hand, a look on his face that sent my stomach dropping. "Who is he?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. I opened my mouth, but no words came. He didn't need an answer. He already knew. "I don't want to hear excuses," he said, his voice tight. "I just want the truth." And for the first time, I had nothing to say. Because what excuse could I give? That I was lonely? That I had lost myself somewhere along the way? That I hadn't meant for this to happen, but now I couldn't undo it? None of it mattered. I packed a bag that night. Not because he told me to leave, but because I couldn't stand the silence. The weight of what I had done. I didn't go to him. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at my reflection in the window, wondering when I had become this person. By morning, I had my answer. Some lines, once crossed, can't be undone. Some choices follow you no matter where you go. And some people, no matter how much you want them, are never meant to be yours.